Imagine with me that you're working for an international company and they gave you an assignment to spend a few months at an overseas branch. A close friend of yours has had a change in his living arrangement, so he volunteers to keep your house while you're gone. You're away a little longer than you originally expected, and when you return, you're shocked to find your house is a complete mess. The yard is overgrown, the gutter full of leaves, and inside it's even worse. The carpets are stained, trash is overflowing and stinks, empty food containers are everywhere, and the previously beautiful dining room table that you inherited from your grandmother is now covered in scratches and watermarks. How would you react? Besides being furious, you would really have two questions. Did my friend really not believe I was coming back? And even more importantly, is he really my friend? Jesus reminds us again and again that we are not owners. Even the things that we think are ours, even our families, come from him and ultimately are his. We are just house sitting. His parables remind us again and again that when he returns, we will have to give an accounting of the kind of servants or stewards we've been, how well we've kept his house. So the words that we should be living to hear one day are these: "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." In order to hear these words, we need to be clear about what we believe and how we should live. What do we believe? Well, we say it every week. "And he shall come again with glory to judge both the quick and the dead, whose kingdom shall have no end." And we see a glimpse of this in Matthew's gospel, a snapshot. "And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." His return will not be in secret. It will be obvious to all, and he will bring with him the company of heaven. But what's going on with those who are still alive? Verse 38. "For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away, so will the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in a field, and one will be taken, one left. 2 women will be grinding at a mill, one will be taken, one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. For those who are still alive, when the Lord returns, everything will change in a blink of an eye." What's interesting, though, is when you read this passage in its context, you'll discover that the Left Behind series teachings and the so-called rapture theory have got it completely and utterly backwards. It's very clear in Matthew that the days of Noah, what was swept away were the wicked. What was left behind was Noah and his family. In fact, in Luke's version of this, the disciples even asked, "Where, Lord? Where were they taken?" And this is Jesus' response: "Where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." Sound like a place you want to go to? Absolutely not. The Lord sweeping away the wicked at the end of all time, as he swept away the wicked in the days of Noah, will so that the meek can inherit the earth. They used to have kind of bumper stickers, Christian bumper stickers, at the height of the rapture teachings that said, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned." What it really needs to say is, "In case of rapture, can I have your car?" We're the ones that will be left behind. But if we truly believe he is going to return and that we will be called to give an accounting of our stewardship, then that belief should have a profound impact on how we live. Jesus said, "To much is given, much will be required." So I think it'd be wise, especially in an Advent season, to stop and ask the question, what markers are there in my life that would identify me as a good and faithful servant? The scriptures actually give us a number one. The first and most obvious mark of being a good and faithful servant is that you have only one master. We read in the lesson from Romans today, "Owe no one anything except to love one another." That is such a simple command, but it's a profound command that has unbelievable spiritual implications. Following this command is how we secure our freedom. Proverbs 22 says, the borrower is a slave to the lender. And Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and money. So ultimately, how we use or misuse our money has a direct impact on who or what is controlling our lives. I was listening to Dave Ramsey podcast the other day, and one of the saddest calls I ever heard. This guy called in, and he had completed all 4 years of college and all 4 years of medical school, but he failed the comprehensive exams 3 times, and they ejected him from medical school. He had $400,000 in student loans and was now a high school science teacher. You could hear Dave's frustrations. He was trying to figure out ways to help this guy, but it was clear as a bell at the end. He is going to be a slave to Fannie Mae for the rest of his life. But when you owe no one anything, you're free. When you finally kick MasterCard out of your life and submit to Master Jesus, then you're free to follow wherever he leads. He can call you to the mission field. He can call you to seminary. He can call you to be a chicken farmer. You're free. You can go where he tells you to go. But if you're not free, you can't. You must be free in order to answer his call. So no one anything except love. The second mark of being a good and faithful servant is that you live in a state of readiness. Jesus is unequivocal that no one knows the day or the hour. This is what he said. Concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. So anytime you see a preacher pull out a chart or tell you he's figured out the formula to figure out when the second coming is, just say, bless your heart, and just keep on moving. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But it is precisely because we cannot know the day or the hour that we live in a state of readiness. We're to live as if he could return any day, perhaps even today. That was Jesus' point when he talked about the people in the days of Noah eating and drinking and giving of marriage. It's not like there's something innately wrong with eating or drinking or marrying. That wasn't Jesus' point. It's not innately wrong. His point was these folks were absolutely clueless. There was a great flood coming, and they were living like they didn't have a care in the world. Not much has changed, has it? Consider Sundays in America, where our churches are half full, but our sports stadiums are packed to the brim. Where our churches are half full, but Walmart parking lot is packed on a Sunday. I'll never forget when we were worshiping at Lancaster Christian Academy before we built this place. I was driving to church on a very crisp Easter morning, and I had to drive by the Walmart. I could have planted 3 churches from the number of people that were at the Walmart at 8 o'clock Easter morning. What, did they run out of peeps? I mean, what would take you to Walmart in Easter? Where are your priorities? This is the day of the resurrection? Halloween, we spent $8.8 billion this year. $8.8 billion. And 1 in 7 American children will go to bed tonight not knowing where their next meal is coming from. They were eating and drinking and given in marriage. They don't have a clue. What Jesus is saying is when you're clueless, your priorities are cattywampus. And so his word to his church and his word to this generation is get a clue, wake up, stay alert. I think it's important to clarify, however, that there's a distinction between living in a state of awareness and living in a state of fear. Jesus said, therefore, be awake. He didn't say, therefore, be afraid. We're not meant to live like there's some sort of judgment hanging over our head, because there's not. The atonement of Jesus Christ has removed that sword. But that's not a call to laziness and inattentiveness. We are to walk, as the wonderful collect in the prayer book says, as if we are ever in his sight, because that's exactly where we are. So St. Paul says, the hour has come for you to wake from sleep. The night is far gone. The day is at hand. We're to wake up, stay awake, and live in a state of readiness. A third mark of a good and faithful servant is that we live according to the master's rules. The Great Commission is not just preach the gospel and baptize. Jesus continues and says, and teach them to observe all that I have commanded you. Remember when you were a kid and you would say, well, at Johnny's house they're allowed to do it. What was the universal parental response? Well, this isn't Johnny's house, and as long as you're going to live under my roof, then you'll follow my rules, right? You have to say that or you lose your parent card. Christians need to think the same way. It doesn't matter what's going on out there in that house. Our citizenship is in heaven. We follow his rules. We live life the way he wants life lived. St. Paul describes how they're living out there. Orgies, drunkenness, sexual immorality, sensuality, quarreling, jealousy. That's chaos. That's chaos. St. Paul says we're not to live that way. He says, let us walk properly as in the daytime. And what I want to encourage you to think about is that the Master's rules should not only inform our personal ethics, they should inform our social ethics. It does not matter how many times the Supreme Court says something is constitutional or how many laws a legislature makes. Something that is wicked cannot be made righteous just because it's now legal. There needs to be a consistency between what we believe personally and our public voice, particularly on major moral issues. The church should always stay out of politics, but you as a Christian have no excuse to do so. Because if you don't let your prophetic voice be made known in the culture, who's going to make it known? Who's going to speak prophetically? So I think of William Wilberforce, who became the tip of the spear to abolish slavery in Great Britain in 1807. And don't listen to that old saw about, well, you have no right to impose your beliefs on others. If you don't, others are going to impose their beliefs on you. That's the reality. Can you imagine a German Christian in 1940 saying, I'm personally opposed to the extermination of the Jews, but who am I to press the German government to change? Lutheran pastor and martyr Dietrich Bonhoeffer is the example. We are called to take stands no matter what the cost is. Don't be silenced. And don't hide into personal ethics and feel like you don't have any responsibilities. You are the salt of the earth. And if the salt loses its savor. Lastly, the fourth point is a good and faithful servant will follow the master so closely that they become an extension of the master's life. How do we do that? Paul gives this beautiful expression in verse 14. Put on Christ. Make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. Put on Christ. Father Chris and I have laughed several times. There's this wonderful video of this frustrated preacher. And he gets in the pulpit. And he starts his sermon and he just pauses. And then he goes, you guys, don't be jerks. You're making me look bad in front of God. Oh, look, here's Jesus. Stop it. The word of the Lord. It's just, we cry over this thing. It's funny, but there's a tragic part of that because so many Christians, unfortunately, live their lives that way. What did Jesus say don't do, and I'll try to stop it? It isn't there. That opens the door to all kinds of legalism and white-knuckle Christianity, and that's not the answer. Because the problem is if your focus is just on stopping something, what are you focused on? The very thing that you're supposed to stop. Remember a number of years ago the government tried that? We're going to end the war on drugs. Just say no. Boy, that worked just fantastic, didn't it? It doesn't work. Why? Because you've stopped short. Paul not only tells us what we're not supposed to be doing, but the answer then, he points us in a positive way, how to live under grace and not under the law. Put on Christ. When you put on Christ, those things fall away. Focus on Christ. Put on Christ. I love how one commentator spoke about this. He said the metaphor of putting on clothing implies more than just imitating Christ's character, but also living in a close personal relationship with him. Don't just imitate him, walk with a close personal relationship with him. That's how you put him on. How do we do that? Well, there's the obvious ways you know. Reading and studying Holy Scripture, the sacraments, personal prayer. Well, let me encourage you to think about two other ways to put on Christ. One is you can have a godly fellowship with Christ By having godly fellowship with one another. The communion of the saints, including the saints you're walking with, is one of the ways you can put on Christ because you are his body. In essence, if you hang around godly people, you become more godly. And St. Paul tells us the opposite is also true. He said, bad company corrupts good morals. So hanging around godly people makes you godly. Hanging around bad people will corrupt your morals. So that's a grace that God has given to the church, fellowship. But another one I want to suggest to you comes from our spiritual ancestors during the Middle Ages. Even before the printing press was invented, there was a devotional that was very, very popular. It was called the Book of Hours. Now, it was written for the laity, but it was patterned after the divine offices that were observed in the monasteries. And the idea is to stop periodically throughout your day to offer private prayers and to reflect on the life of Christ. It's the kind of pattern that Lawrence and Kelly are following as Third Order Benedictines. They could probably tell you a lot more about it than I can. But you also need to know you don't have to join an order to live this pattern. Wonderfully, in the 1979 Book of Common Prayer and even in the 2019, the new one that we have, there are brief little devotions throughout the day. Morning, midday, noon, early evening, close of day, compline. And the rhythm is that you stop what you're doing a little bit, just for moments, and you focus and you say your prayers and you refocus on Christ, and then you go back to work. And a little while you stop and you refocus on Christ again and say your prayers, and then you go back to work. And that pattern is throughout the day. Like the old preacher said, you won't have to pray so long if you learn to pray more often, right? And just pepper it throughout the day. And it really changes the flow of your day. It's what Brother Lawrence would call practicing the presence of Christ. I commend it to you. So what do we believe? We believe that he will come again. And when he does, we will have to give an accounting of what kind of stewards we have been. So in the wisdom of the church, this penitential season of Advent, which starts our new church year, is designed for us to ask ourselves some of the hard questions that we need to ask. And then to seek his grace to make the necessary changes so that we are indeed good and faithful servants. But here's very key, very key. This is not a work that we do for him. This is a work that we do with him. St. Paul said it this way, I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. And may that day come soon. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.